Welcome back to Comic Central. My name, as always, is Christian, and today we're talking comics, specifically how comic books are made.
Fight crime with Spider-Man, meet the Fantastic Four, and watch Captain America in action.
The first step in any great comic book is the idea or concept of that comic book. As children, we all came up with really cool stories, and then some of those children made really cool stories. Whether it's Joe Shuster or Jerry Siegel coming up with the concept of Superman, or you coming up with that sweet burn for Deborah in accounting, the concept of a comic can make or break its reception. One of those key instances is when Donny Cates decided that the green slime that Venom secretes is actually his excrement. That's a whole story for a different day.
Hey, Spidey, isn't Marvel's new Pizzazz magazine fantastic? Fantastic, but not perfect.
The second step in our comic creation process is the plot. Now, the plot is figuring out how the story unfolds. One tool that a lot of authors use is called a beat sheet. A beat sheet will have all of the major beats of a story mapped out, and that allows them to then go in and more easily fill in the details of how does a person get from point A to point B. And once they have that, they move on to the script. And the script is really the meat and potatoes of the process of writing. But there are two very different ways of writing comic books, and those are the plot script, or the Marvel method, or the full script.
There is something called the Marvel method. They had always been written scripted, the way a motion picture has a screenplay. And these artists were so brilliant, and they were so good at story themselves, that I would say to the artist, look, this is the plot I want. And I would either tell them in a few words what the story was, or I would write an outline on a page or 2 pages or a few paragraphs. And I'd say, you go ahead and draw it any way you want. It doesn't matter. I'll put the words in and tie it all together.
Now, while this was a popular method back in the day, fans now take issues with how credit was given for those issues. For instance, oftentimes the artists design everything themselves. They put everything to page before Stan would even see it. So, in the case of Spider-Man, even though Stan touted for years that he was the sole creator of Spider-Man, it was Steve Ditko, the original artist of Spider-Man, who developed the visual style, the visual identity, and the way Spider-Man all looked and carried themselves. And there was a big area of contention for a number of years.
Steve, and it had nothing to do with me, this was all Steve's idea. When he brought me the pages, he had devoted something like 3 full pages just showing Spider-Man pinned under that heavy weight and trying his best to extricate himself.
Now, are you writing your first comic book? Well, if so, superstar author Neil Gaiman has some tips on the standard comic book format. And there are 3 acts. Act 1 typically introduces your central characters, the plot of the comic, the central conflict, and typically the comic book's setting and mood. In Act 2 is where all of the character development takes place. Arcs, setbacks, challenges, what the character learns, and the climax of the story as well. Then it goes to Act 3, or the post-climax. And that's where the characters typically undergo a transformation following everything that happened in the first 2 arcs.
Well, I think I've got to say seriously, which isn't easy for me to do, but I think it's very impressive that in a matter of 20 minutes you guys could come up with something like this. I mean, bad as it is, it's still impressive.
The fourth step in the process is probably my personal favorite, as I'm a little bit biased. It's the art. The visuals of comic books in particular are truly where a comic book can shine. So let's talk about the process. The penciler often is the primary contributing artist of the issue. Typically, they get top billing. And how they do it is they start with thumbnails and get approvals from both art directors, the author themselves, and editorial before they can move on. What they do there is then they fill in the issue with all of those thumbnails and can make a complete and total issue. Now, with the advent of digital art, it has allowed pencilers to work with Photoshop, Illustrator, and apps like Procreate. Now, the inker has an incredibly interesting job, and it's more than just laying ink to paper. Oftentimes, the inker interprets the work of the penciler, and they do things like correct things if they need correcting, putting their own little flourish on it, but at the same time, their job is to bring out the art of the penciler. Now, It then goes to a colorist, and colorists do amazing things. Typically nowadays, they are made with digital methods like Photoshop, Illustrator, but a lot of artists, like Alex Ross, Dustin Nguyen, and a few others, still work with materials like gouache and acrylics.
All right, now we are here kind of at the Wall of Fame here, looking at all this stuff. Now, what is Captain America up to lately?
Right now, he's in outer space. This is very unusual for him because usually when you want to represent America, you want to be in America.
Right.
So he's been shanghaied into outer space, and that's where he'll celebrate his 400th issue, which is out next month.
Wow, 400 issues. You must be a proud father.
What happens next is once all of the art is completed, all of the letters are put in, they get sent off to the printers, and then the printer prints those issues, and then for the next few months, comic book companies will spend their time marketing those issues. So they will use things like previews, which is something that we'll talk about in a later episode, to let comic book shops know of everything that's coming out in the next couple of months. So after comic book companies will market their comics, they'll then be sent from the comic book stores to the distributor, which is Diamond. If you checked out our last video, you'll see a little bit more about them. And then Diamond will take all of those comic books and ship them to all of the 2,000 comic book stores that the United States has. Now, they don't just go to us anymore. They go all over the world. They're printed in multiple languages, multiple different colors. Sometimes they even have things taken out. If we're talking about smaller creators, that's a little bit different. Oftentimes, smaller creators will do all of the work themselves. And that's not just including the writing and the illustration. Oftentimes, that includes the marketing and the distribution of their own issues.
Would that be my spider sense returning?
What's that? He's back.
Way to go. Don't let those overgrown tin men keep you down.
But I guess you could say that small creator marketing is a topic for another issue. And with that, my friends, my name, as always, is Christian Lauber. This is Comic Central, and from all of us here, and that's me, from all of us here at Comic Central. Read on, and we'll see you in the next one.